Hey, good morning. I'd like to call the June 14th meeting for the curriculum committee together. Note that all board members are here. Joan Ensign, Katie Doser, and myself, along with Tim Shell. Approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
And I have no public comments, which takes us to the math pilot.
Yes.
From grades 5 to 8.
And this is really just a reconnector on information we've already shared, but I did pull some pieces in last night after the retreat. Not a lot of new information, but I'll quickly walk us through. So if you could pull up the update, Rebecca. So this largely is based on information you saw previously in the spring when Amy presented on the elementary mathematics adoption. And so what we have here is, I don't know if I should probably just.
I have them also on the white table because I was expecting for pathways is what I'm thinking.
Yes. But as you know, we piloted elementary math this year and had an adoption decision that came through the committee and then the full board this spring. At the time, we shared that we were doing a similar piece for 5-8. So again, for several years now, we've been using Go Math from Houghton Mifflin Harcourt at our intermediate and middle schools. There is not a new edition of Go Math that is forthcoming. And we've been in Go Math for, I think, 8 years now. So it's time for us to kind of review the landscape. As you may remember from the earlier conversation around elementary, Wisconsin updated its mathematics standards in 2021. So we've had a work group that's been meeting really since the very beginning of this calendar year in January with one of the mathematics consultants at CISA 2, Molly Rilling, to evaluate resources and select materials. The work group selected illustrative mathematics as the resource they'd like to pilot as the core. We'll refresh a little information on illustrative in a few minutes here in the presentation. This is the same core that has been used in the materials the elementary's adopted. So we anticipate when this process completes, we'll have a consistent framework, kindergarten up through middle school. Now, there are two different publishers, though, on the illustrative mathematics line that we are evaluating in the upcoming year. So one is Amplify Desmos. And the two things to know about Amplify Desmos are, one, it's a little more technology-based than the other. The other is Imagine Learning, which is the version that was adopted for elementary, is blended. It has both digital components and paper-based components. Amplify is much more inclined to be digital, as is true with most Amplify resources. We just adopted Amplify Math for middle school ELA, and we use several Amplify Science modules at the intermediate and middle school levels too. The other thing, though, is that Amplify has partnered with Desmos, which is an online graphing software that our high school mathematics team uses extensively, and our middle school mathematics team uses some. So I think it's fair to say, as you go up in grade, the Desmos component of Amplify is interesting to our teachers. I mean, we need to see how it works in practice. Intermediate school has had much less experience with Desmos, so that's not necessarily, at least at this point, as much of a draw. We'll see what their feedback is of the pilot. We also are looking at refreshing what we're doing in high school algebra 1. So they won't be participating in the decision-making process for middle school and intermediate school materials adoptions, but the high school algebra 1 team will be sampling, piggybacking on this pilot to sample the Amplify Desmos resource this year to see if it's something we might want to also move to for high school algebra 1. Because again, we offer algebra 1 both as the course that most of our 8th graders take, but then we also have an algebra 1 at the high school. So these are the two resources. And again, this is really aligned with the direction we started going in this year with the elementary adoption. So that's the landscape. Because this is all based on illustrative mathematics, wanted to kind of circle back and share a little bit about illustrative mathematics. So this is a project that came out of the big changes in mathematics standards back in 2010 with the advent of the Common Core. And the concept was at the time, if we put all of this work nationally into a framework that states could borrow from, why not have an open source project that could be the core of materials? And so that was generally the concept here. So with illustrative mathematics, even though we are piloting two different resources, the units are essentially the same. So they'll be doing the same units. It'll just be probably different flavors. I don't want to say it's as simple as an orange and a tangerine, but that's maybe not the worst metaphor. The units will be the same. It's really how the materials are presented, how student-friendly are they, how teacher-friendly are they, what kind of supports do they provide for formative assessment, what kind of resources do they provide for special populations. But the learning targets, the skills and concepts are the same across both resources. Again, you'd see the technology component a little more forward in the Amplify version, maybe not as much in the Imagine Learning. It is based very strongly on today's standards, and it is reinforcing skills, but it is also very focused on developing flexible problem solving that hopefully kids aren't just looking for one or two things they know and trying to copy it to all situations. The other thing to know is that illustrative math really does, it doesn't spiral. So you may remember in the old days with everyday math, we had it within the year spiral. But illustrative mathematics really does try to look at concepts that build naturally from grade to grade and kind of highlight those as a learning trajectory through the different grades. And if I'm going too fast, I can slow down. This was included in the elementary presentation, but this is a refresher because this is pretty important. The other thing is, and we find increasingly this is the lesson structure that works very well with children for learning today, is there are routines and there are also a lot of opportunities for students to engage in conversation around the mathematics with each other in the lesson. So it builds community, it builds student interaction. Most importantly, if students have to talk about the mathematics they're learning, they tend to learn it better and retain it more. So again, it's illustrative mathematics itself is a nonprofit, but then publishers borrow from the illustrative mathematics framework and they sell materials. Now we could just work with kind of the generic illustrative mathematics. But if we did that, that'd really be paper-based. You wouldn't have any of the technology add-ons. You wouldn't have the resources that support as much differentiation for special populations. You wouldn't have language support. And really in the generic version of illustrative mathematics, there's a lot less support for teachers. There's support for teachers, but not what a publisher would add. So that's why we went with Imagine Learning versus a generic illustrative mathematics for elementary. And that's why we're piloting Imagine Learning and Amplify Desmos for intermediate and middle school instead of just looking at the basic imprint. I mean, I don't know if you remember this, but at one point we were looking at Kendall Hunt, which was very close to generic for the elementary, and we decided to go with Imagine Learning because it just offered so much more for the teachers in particular, and then also for kids. Now, a little bit about the pilot details. And this is kind of important to recognize. We're going to have each pilot, each resource, I should say, will be piloted by 2 teachers per level. So there'll be 2 5th grade teachers using Amplify Desmos, 2 5th grade teachers using Imagine Learning, You think about Math 7, we'll have 2 on Imagine Learning and 2 on Amplified Desmos. That's going to be our consistent approach. One thing is that teachers are getting their access to materials online over the summer. Illustrative mathematics in itself is making some tweaks to its framework in the last year that are coming out over the summer that its partner publishers are responding to. Amy and I are working with Imagine Learning and Amplified Desmos to provide kind of our pilot training for participating teachers in very early September. We're really targeting the start of the second week of school. The first unit of the year is going to be a Go Math unit anyways, but access to the resources will be realized over the summer. We're going to do most of our piloting in the first half of the year. Then come late winter, we'll be working through our evaluation process and hopefully bringing a recommendation to you on the standard timeline. And then if all goes as we expect, whichever resource is selected, we would look for implementation 25, 26. And so that's kind of the high level, kind of reconnecting with you on this. We had a lot of this information in the K4 presentation. I think that was back in March, but this is big. And there are a few additional details we had for today. So that's why I wanted to take some time on that. Any questions on this for now? We'll be connecting back in with you on this over the course of the year. Now, they don't need approval, but for your information, we have the cost contribution quotes for the 2 resources. You'll notice the Amplify is more. It's not necessarily going to be more to adopt it, but we noticed this with the ELA pilot at the middle school. Amplify, when you do run a pilot, they look for more of a cost contribution from the district than some of the other vendors do. Yes,
So if you choose them,
Mhm.
you get to keep the resources.
Usually not, because these tend to be more consumables. I know. You know, I mean,
Okay,
two former teachers at the table, somebody with a business background. It's not too late to go into textbook publishing. I'm just putting that out there. So, but no, that's
all right,
it is what it is.
all right.
But I will say, we had put in a $25,000 placeholder in our budgeting for the contribution towards the mathematics pilot. And this is coming in about $10,000 below it when you combine the 2.
Oh.
So we're comfortable. This is within our budget
Yeah.
estimate.
Yeah, okay.
Any other questions about the mathematics?
Looks good.
I'll let you drive. You're the professional.
You're doing great. So, next, testing schedule, 24, 25.
Okay, so this is something we bring in routinely, and this is an action item. The committee adopts it. It goes to the full board in July. There are some important things to know. We do have some changes here, primarily in response to Act 20. And so I think probably, yeah, actually bring in the top one. That's the more simplified one. The other one has everything, including the name. So the first thing, as has been mentioned previously, we've known since Act 20 was enacted that we were going to need to pivot from the benchmark assessment system. So the replacement is the qualitative reading inventory. It's actually in its 7th edition. This is an assessment that's been around for a long time. It is the only similarity it really shares with something like the BAS is that it's an interview-based assessment. Meaning that it's not students sitting at a computer or independently with a paper sheet and answering short item responses. The teacher has some passages and word lists, but I think the key thing is the QRI is very diagnostic and is focusing much more on skills that are centered in the science of reading. And it's not looking for the cueing type of analysis that you would see with the benchmark assessment system. And so it's much more diagnostic. We did have teacher teams pilot this during the year. It seems, again, it depends on the student. Some students will take longer, some less, because you may try a word list out with a student and you may find maybe you need to use a different word list given where they were at compared to where you thought they were at coming into the test administration. But on balance, the feedback is this is a little more time efficient than the BAS ones. And again, it's much more diagnostic. It gets more to the foundational skills. The administration schedule would be very similar to what the BAS was, but it will provide a, again, that more detailed complement to whatever the state's standardized screener is. So that's the first piece to understand.
Okay, so
Yes.
I haven't, unless that's in the second level,
Mhm.
I don't recall seeing the STAR assessment listed.
No,
So does this replace the STAR?
this is more of the BAS replacement.
Okay,
So if we scroll down to, yes, that one. The TBD, 4K and elementary screener and
that'd be the
diagnostic.
state assessment.
Right, so as part of Act 20, the state is moving us back to a mandated single screener for literacy. They have a procurement. DPI has said for a few months now, they're committed to announcing a decision by July 1. It's not July 1 yet. We don't want to get ahead of our skis. There is some reason to believe that a decision has been made and they are now in their pre-announcement period where the vendors who were not selected have a chance to engage with DPI and understand the decision better. So I think we'll know a decision soon.
Okay.
And so our thinking has been, and I mean, Renaissance did apply. I mean, it's not impossible. It could be Renaissance. But what we are going to do is once we know what DPI's decision is, that automatically becomes our 4K through 3 screener for literacy by state law.
Okay.
We would automatically use it, the 4th grade version of it. It makes no sense to have something like that. And most of the vendors that are in the pool, and the vendors we think are the most competitive vendors, not only have a literacy screener that DPI would be covering for us, they would also have a mathematics screener. So for example, again, not saying it's going to be STAR, but if it were STAR, it'd be STAR reading,
Right.
and then districts would buy STAR math. If, say, Ames Web was the successful candidate, Ames Web has a literacy screener, and
Okay.
Ames Web has a mathematics screener. So I think what we are planning to do, and I think this is what most districts are planning to do, is utilize the state, because we have to, it'll be a mandated screener on the literacy side, and then also independently pay for the mathematics screener, so we have a comparable platform for literacy and mathematics. So we're going to have to come back in over the summer and update you along with everybody else on what this is. But I mean, so you know, when you see an announcement in the media, because it probably will be covered because Act 20 has been getting, and deservedly so, a lot of attention. When you see whatever the state's adoption decision is, ours is going to be following that, obviously for the mandated areas, but also for the mathematics in 4th grade.
So, Tim, that's the information that's fed into our report card score.
That teacher assessment in the classroom, and also something, for example, like the QRI.
And the teachers give the QRI.
Mhm.
How do they use it? Do they use that to help place like kids in reading groups?
They will, because the QRI is diagnostic. It'll give you an idea of where the student is in their vocabulary development, in their word attack. You'll be able to assess their fluency and their reading comprehension by the passages. So that combined with the screener And what you're seeing with our other literacy materials in the classroom will paint that picture. And so when you look at, when you get down into the guidance that teachers get, this is something where Amy and the coaches work with the grade level teams to develop guidance for how you take these different assessment pieces and arrive at a 1, 2, 3, or 4 on the report card.
Just for a point of clarification, I've got a.
Yeah.
Joan, I don't. Go ahead. So is there a way to clarify on this? Which one of these standardized tests feed into our state report card grade? I'm just
yes.
thinking because of what our district priorities are, what their goal is, so which ones feed into that? And then also, I'm thinking now that we know when these tests are, if we can get an comparison update as they come in, like if we can figure out a schedule of those that feed into the state report card so that we can continuously monitor where we are with that priority. And then, or our goal. And then I'm just curious of these, assessments. Do we know at this point what standardized tests our buildings will use in order to set their yearly building goals?
So we haven't had any of our school improvement institutes yet.
Okay,
But let me kind of back up. The QRI, and even though it's a state adopted assessment, whatever the state adopts as a literacy screener will not be reflected on the report card.
okay,
State report card from an assessment standpoint is based off of the forward, which is administered 3rd grade through 8th grade for ELA and mathematics, and then also in 10th grade for social studies. For high school, the accountability for mathematics and ELA is coming from the pre-ACT in grades 9 and 10 and the ACT in 11. And then science is the forward in grades 4 and 8 and pre-ACT and ACT in 9, 10, 11. So we can highlight those on there. And in fact, I will say, Rebecca, I hate to do this to you, but if you could go back to the agenda and pull up the other attachment that is like the full menu. Yes, on this schedule, and again, it varies. We do have some codes on here. So where you see the caret, so like forward exam, you see a caret there. That indicates a state mandated assessment that would feed into the report card. And we do our best to estimate the time. Again, most of these tests, with the exception of the pre-ACT and the ACT, are not timed. And again, even with the pre-ACT and ACT, if a student has an individual plan, there is an accommodations process and it could go longer. But pieces like the forward exam, that's those estimated times come from DPI. It's based on the best data they have from field testing. And the thing is, with all of these being mostly computer-based tests today, the vendor and then DPI or us get a lot of information about how long students typically use, but every kid's different. Some kids move through more efficiently. Some kids even rush. Other kids are very careful, they take longer. So these are generally just time estimates.
Tim, do you get results from the forward test, just from the forward test? Are there results sent to the district?
Yes, but not fast enough.
So when would we get results from the forward test?
Well, so this year, it's going to be a little later because with those new standards coming in, DPI worked with the vendor to update the test items. And DPI has gone through kind of a recalibration process, as I understand it, with the new standards on it. So my best information is it'll be later in July when we get our forward data back, as opposed to in a normal year, we would get our forward assessment data back usually in late June or very early July. Now, pre-ACT and ACT have become a lot more rapid, partly due to changes DPI has made and partly due to improvements ACT has made on the reporting portal. But we typically get, even for accommodated students, we will get results back usually within 6 weeks for the ACT or the pre-ACT. So we know where we haven't seen the official DPI report yet, but we've seen the data from ACT that will equate to that in the ACT portal. So the high school team already knows where that data has come in. Now, like all other state assessments, it's embargoed, but we were actually able to start having conversations around our ACT data back in early May.
So are those things that we can, you say it's embargoed?
Yeah.
So that means that's like, we can't look and compare data for forward test until it's, because we know it internally,
Yes.
but as a district, like, we can't look at those results earlier than when the state report card actually comes out, or can we start looking at those things now?
We can start looking at, well, not the forward yet because we don't have it, but let's just
Right,
take
but
the pre-ACT and
it's
ACT.
July.
The administrative team, some of our department leaders Janelle's nodding, some of that's been shared with the high school staff.
We've already done.
They've already seen the data, but we can't share it in a public meeting. So I could not today bring the ACT and pre-ACT data in here. If each of you wanted to individually set up a time to meet with me, I could walk you through our data right now for
Okay,
ACT and pre-ACT. And I could do the same when forward comes out. Once we get the data, we can use it internally. We just can't take it into a public venue until DPI takes it off and bar it. So
And that's October.
usually October. But, we would know by late summer, on track, not on track, how much more work we have to do this year to hit where we want to be by next spring.
and can you present that in a public meeting? Like, we're on track, we're not on track? Can you present that in a public meeting? Without presenting the specific data?
So I think I could. I couldn't put any numbers up there. So if I told you we are on track, we're a little behind where we would like to be. If somebody asks, well, how far off track are you? I'm not going to be able to answer
You can't
that
say okay, I was
question.
just curious
But
what we can
I could do that.
discuss.
We could definitely do that as long as you understand that if there's a follow-up question, we might need to kind of hold off on answering that until it's off embargo.
Yeah.
But again, I want to be very clear. As long as it doesn't come into a public meeting before the embargo's out, as we get this data, just like, we share it with our educators, as board members, I'm happy to meet with you individually as we get the information and kind of share where we're at. It just can't come into a public venue. I know it seems a little weird, but
Why
those
is
are the-
it
Okay, so-
embargoed?
so the reason it's embargoed is the data is not going to shift much, but DPI comes through the back end and they want to do a lot of quality control to make sure that if Tim Shell moved mid-testing window from, Waunakee to, say, Cottage Grove, moving from the Waunakee Community School District to the Monona Grove School District, that we know which district gets to count his score. They want to know when it feeds into the report cards, and there's things like the value added, and we're looking at some of these, is a student in that closing, that target group score, that lowest 25%, that's all data quality control on the DPI end, so they know when they issue the report card that it's accurate. That's really the biggest factor that drives the entire delay in reporting.
All right, so procedurally, to save you time, would it be possible for a committee to go into closed session and receive that data in closed session?
So from the standpoint of the embargo, yes, we would need to check whether that's an allowable topic for closed session. It might be.
Yeah.
This is
Might
the
be.
first time I've ever entertained the question. I'll probably see Randy this afternoon over at the soccer game. I'll float the question by him because that would satisfy the embargo. They just don't want, what DPI doesn't want is a number getting out there in the general public. So if we have a meeting that's not in the public eye, and I give you a number, and then later on, that number shifts by 1/10 of a point. We have a lot of conversations. We have an ability to go back in and kind of explain why the number shifted, and it's good. If you're a member of the general public, it's a snapshot in time. You're gonna form an impression based on the information you get, or at least that's how DPI sees it. So they're very cautious to make sure that the information that's presented has been thoroughly reviewed for data quality. In reality, these numbers change very little, if at all, but for DPI's purposes, they want to be very careful.
I think Mark makes a good point, though. If that's something we can do, just because it's our #1 priority.
I
as a
agree.
district, I think it would make sense to at least have the information sooner than later as a board. So if it's.
I'll try to remember to mention it to Randy this afternoon. I might not because it's the soccer
Yeah.
game, but we're definitely all here on Monday, and we'll make sure we get that question addressed on
All right.
Monday.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the test schedule? Compliments on the shorter version for the board.
Mhm.
You know, it's, yeah. And giving us some more detail, that's appreciated.
So I will need a motion on this, and then we'll have to come in with a revision in the summer. And we won't take that one through this committee. We'll take that direct to the board, and basically plug in that TBD with whatever the state has adopted.
Motion. Go ahead.
Motion to, approve.
Second.
On favor? Aye.
Okay, thank you. Just very quickly, and then we will, I would say, get into our really big rocks for today. This is just a very brief update that we give every year around this time about where we are at in terms of recruiting our teacher leadership positions. This actually comes through your consent agenda, usually in August, with a whole bunch of other extra pay for extra duty type roles. And so the ones in red are the positions that we're entering into new 3-year terms. If the individual is new to the position, even if they're returning to it after a multi-year hiatus, they have an asterisk, so you can kind of see what our mix of new folks and returning folks are. And right now, I believe we have every seat on the bus filled, with the exception of we're still working on recruitment for the Heritage Science Coordinator. So hopefully we get that wrapped up by August. Otherwise, our slots are filled. Very pleased to see a lot of great educators returning in leadership roles, but also some new faces. So I think it's healthy, but again, this will come through as part of, I think, your August consent agenda and part of your HR transactions.
Okay,
It's just information item.
which brings us to pathways.
Brings us to pathways, and I'm going to take the clicker over to here. And I think you all know Janelle Dorn. But Janelle is our district pathways. Janelle's position is split 50-50 between district coordination, which she does extremely well, and she's also the high school pathway specialist. And you may remember with our policy revision process, starting last year, you added under your new advanced learning policy an annual report, because that's the recommended best practice. So you had your first annual report last year, and we welcome Janelle back this morning for round 2.
Thank you, Tim. So the numbers that I'm going to be showing in here are numbers that were accurate as of May 31st. We change constantly, so these numbers are now already different, but they're a good snapshot. So this is giving you an overall numbers of our students that are identified through pathways in our elementary buildings. So you can see they're pretty similar between Heritage and Prairie. We have a little bit of an increase with our Arboretum students, a few more students there identified. And then this is broken down into a couple of different subject areas. Students are mainly referred to us for evaluation for ELA, English Language Arts, as well as math. Those are the 2 areas. And you'll see the numbers here. Again, you'll see that difference. Arboretum has more, whereas Heritage and Prairie are at about the same number. And then in math, broke it down a little bit here. The majority of our students, when they're referred to us, we're trying to evaluate to see if they have mastered the curriculum at their current grade level. And we do expect them to have a pretty strong mastery if we're going to accelerate them in math, as well as having strong problem-solving abilities. And the math department has been pleased with this. They've seen that the students stay consistently strong in their placement. So it seems like that's a very good fit for what we're doing in math. Most students are accelerated just 1 year. Occasionally, we have some students that are accelerated more than 1 year. And then we have some students that they're kind of in a gray area where they may not have quite enough mastery of that curriculum that they would skip over, but they have really strong problem-solving abilities. And so we try to balance, and what we asked the teachers to do is to work with us to pre-test them on every unit. And determine if they need differentiated curriculum for that unit, helping them to provide students with something different so they're not sitting there learning the same thing that they've already mastered. So those are our watch list students. There's a few more at Prairie than there are in the others, but not much. It's pretty similar with watch lists. And then we move up to our intermediate school students. Noticing that overall numbers are at 98 students that are identified, but noting that they may be identified in more than one area. So the numbers aren't going to total, won't work that way. Majority of our students are identified in English language arts. That's the area where most students have shown that strength, and we're moving them, especially when we're looking at the middle school, that becomes those advanced English sections. And then math watch list, in May, we had 5. We had 52 accelerated 1 year, 2 accelerated 2 years, and we didn't have any at 5-8 at that point, accelerated 3 or more years. Oh, I apologize. This number is not including middle school. This is just intermediate. I do apologize. At the middle school, you'll see the increase again. So adding more students every year. ELA again is strong, but that number of accelerated 1 year, it's increased again. And another one that's increased in our 2 years, but again, none of them are accelerated 3 or more years at this grade level at that point. Then we move to the high school, and there's even more students that are identified. Again, strong in ELA, they're in our advanced English 9 and 10 classes. We don't remove them or take that off of them if they're in the junior or senior years. They're still considered advanced learners in English. But all students can take AP classes. It's not like we have a separate section for them. They may need some additional support, additional things that we're looking at. Sometimes our students here may be also advanced in their writing abilities. So our creative writing teachers are sometimes doing additional work with them. Their students that if it's in particular with writing, we may have encouraged them to take creative writing earlier. And then we've had students that will do independent studies with one of our creative writing teachers to further that writing.
So both of the middle and the high school, advanced English.
Yep.
Are all of the students in advanced English and pathways, or just some?
All of the students who are in the advanced English sections are students that have gone through, but I would say at the high school level, I get a lot of students that come to me and say, I'm not feeling challenged, and I work with them and we work together. Working also with Molly Swanhurst and Walter Stens, who are the AE teachers at the high school. And we'll look at what they're doing when I do the additional evaluation with them, looking at them holistically. And also, once they're in the high school, especially our freshman students that are asking me to look at second semester freshman year, are asking to look at fourth grade 10. Sometimes the students won't be standing out quite as much as some of the others, but they've shown such drive and passion in their regular English class and gone way above and beyond. We are erring more on moving them into it. And we're finding that, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, about talented versus gifted, and those students that work extra hard and those students that are always want more and always want to do more, that tends to come out more and more as they get older. But yes, all of them are identified through that.
Well, in the past, it wasn't necessarily the case. So are there fewer students applying for it than in the past? Because we used to have a huge group. And some of them were pathway students, but I'd say the majority were not at that time.
I don't recall when that would have been. I mean, back in my day, when I was there with you, it was English 1A, right? And then
Yeah.
English 2A.
Right,
And
and we expanded it to 2 sections at that time, just because of the number of students applying, but I don't remember, all of them being pathway students at that point.
I'd have to look back.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
It wouldn't have been, but I mean, we are at 2 sections for
Right.
both
Right.
AE9 and AE10s.
It could be that more kids are being identified early now compared to them, and that would have been the group that were.
It also, AE9 in particular, it's challenging. It's when you look at the overall Lexile level of the books that they're reading in AE9, it's only second to AP Lit.
Yeah.
So it's very high level reading text. Uncle Tom's Cabin is not an easy read. It's a dry read, so it takes a lot of stamina to get through text like that. I do have some 8th graders now that are feeling apprehensive, even if they're incredibly strong ELA students. They're very worried about how much work they'll have to do for AE9. And so we've had some students that are starting to pre-read, and we talk about, that's fine. You can read some of these books in the summer to become familiar with them. And then when you have them in class, you can read through them a little bit more quickly. And students have been really appreciative of that. So I think, again, this year I worked with 4 or 5 students that asked for me to share some titles with them, so.
Thank you.
Let's see, so high school, ELA, and then again, large numbers of students accelerated in 1 year. Here we do have a couple of students that were accelerated more than 3 or more years. So we don't just accelerate or don't just identify in reading and math, or ELA and math. We also are looking at all 10 different areas. Majority of them are in English or ELA and math, but you'll see the world language numbers are really starting to increase, especially when we get students who have come through our district and have had Spanish for a number of years. But then also students transferring in from other districts who have been in bilingual programs, who have had concentrated areas. We do have a lot of our native speakers are coming through and looking at that. It's been a learning curve, I would say, with our world language staff, with our ELA staff, with Pathways, all trying to work on this together to make sure that we know what's happening with students. Sometimes world language teachers would just be moving them, and we're like, wait a minute, no, this takes coordination between buildings, you need assistance. And but it's been really nice to see. I would say in particular with our native speakers, for me at the high school level, it has been such a pleasure to be able to work with some of our populations that are coming in that aren't always seen, right? They're not always the ones that people think of as being advanced learners. And I'm sitting there where they can switch back and forth between 2 languages. That's an advanced learner to me for sure. So one student that we have coming up to the high school next year that one was interesting, where we had ELA staff trying to help the student plan for next year. I was trying to help the student plan for next year, world languages involved, and it was great because there were so many different opinions coming in that this would be, we see with some of our native speakers that although they speak very fluently, they may not have the grammatical piece that they need to be most successful, not only in our courses here, but as they move forward, if they are going to move to want to be seeking a career using that bilingual ability, understanding that text and going on into college. So it's been great to work with everyone, and hearing everybody's perspectives, and the world language staff has been great with coming up with different ideas for some of these students, and in this student in particular who will begin in Spanish for next year, will go to 5-6, but then we're talking about senior year. Are we going to have the student go to the university? Are we going to have a different grammatical program here? Just a lot of different things, because we do have that, for heritage speakers as well. I think we changed the name of that. I'm trying to remember if we did.
I think we're still calling it Spanish for heritage speakers, but
Okay.
now we've got a 2-year cycle, and
Right.
Jenny Balcazar is working on building that out for.
So there's a lot of different options with them. So it's, that area has been great to see, and being able to recognize these students, and that's been wonderful. We do have a couple in science. It doesn't happen very often, but we have a couple where they will double up in science their freshman year, take both biology and chemistry in freshman year, and then be able to progress further through students who have really driven in that area. Some of the other areas we don't get a lot of referrals for, because when you are referring a student, you're looking at what are you replacing in their regular school day. So it's hard when you get referrals for creativity or leadership or some of these other areas. It's hard to know how to support that within the school day. But we do have one student currently who is identified with creativity, and so just having a lot of different outlets within the classroom, and it's an interesting conversation to have with their regular teachers on how we are allowing that student that ability. And then these were the students as of the end of May. Now there's more. I've already received a couple more this week for evaluation. So these are students that we will be evaluating. Either we were finishing up at the end of the year. Most of them, though, are students that we will be evaluating over the summer. And I know there's a couple more at 5-8 for sure that I will talk about with Anna.
And I just want to step in for a moment. You may not remember, but in this year's budget development process, we did include some additional summer days for certain positions, including pathways. And previous to this, when we were providing summer coverage, we would flex it. Janelle would flex your schedule, but that would mean that Janelle might not be here for a day during the regular year. The additional days you supported in your budget development this year are allowing us to meet these needs over the summer without needing to flex days out of the regular academic year. So I think that's all to the good. Now, of course, there are things we hope to do to, really enrich our pathways opportunities long-term that would require additional investments, but those summer days have been a nice first step.
It's because we usually can't. My days are just always carried over.
You're fully scheduled.
Take off. Yeah. And then this is about referrals, and this is a big part of the topic today. Is we have existed on a referral-based system for a number of years. So students can be referred, by several different people. You'll see the most number of referrals that we receive are at the elementary level, most of them by parents, some by teachers. And it's pretty similar at grades 5 through 8. High school, it's mainly students coming in and talking to me, like I gave the example with English, but there are also students that are new to the district, so that parents are communicating with me. And then this is, again, they can be referred by parents, teachers, they can refer themselves, and then also pathway specialists. So there are students that we keep an eye on, in particular at the elementary level, where they're doing extension groups with students who aren't necessarily identified. They are recommended by their teachers as needing something more. And so both Lynn Cedarholm and Stephen Stack have enrichment groups where they're working with these students. And they, through working with them, maybe seen, okay, this student I think might need more, let's do a deeper, dive into that student. And these are also including auto referrals, which I'll talk about next. So I started talking about this last year. So it's improving our identification process, and this is something that I've been working on quite a bit since probably 2017, 2018, trying to look at what we could do differently, because I knew then that I didn't like the way that we were doing things. We needed to be more equitable. So one of the things that we started to really focus on are automatic triggers, looking at all of our standardized test scores that students are already going through. As you were talking about before, there's a lot of testing going on. So what can we pull from that? And so we have been able to and continue with that in this past year, and then we expanded that to more grade levels and looking at additional standardized assessments as well. And again, additional students were identified in both reading and math through using those. And then the other process that I really wanted to work on more was using some sort of a universal screener. So we have, I think it was over the course of 3 years, maybe 2, and then we took a break.
Yeah.
We used the TOMEGs, and then they had revised TOMEGs to the TOMEGs 2. And we used this twice with our second graders in the fall. The feedback that we received from the teachers as well as admin in the elementary buildings is that it would be nice if we already knew these students when they came into second grade rather than after they had been in second grade. So we tried and moved it down to working with first graders in the spring. And that's a big ask for first graders to take a standardized test like this. And especially because they had updated the test to the TOMEGs 2, which was even more rigorous than the TOMEGs. So we did identify a few more students through that, but there wasn't a large increase in identification of our students more from marginalized populations. And with the first graders, there was definitely some frustration with the students and with the teachers that were there administering it. It was a hard ask for first graders. So we continued on this inequity in testing. So there's a quote there, and this is from Dr. Jack Naglieri. And he is the author of several, I think it was, there's been several different renditions of the Naglieri assessments. I think the one before this was the NAT 3, which is the one that that's the one that I started with in 17 or 18, thinking I like this. I'd like to move into something like this. I think Tim, you and I met with the COGAD people. We looked at a few different things, but I think that's a pretty amazing quote to look at how many, the estimate of how many students from these populations could have been identified for programs and are not. That's pretty an astounding number, and Waunakee is not not an exception here. We are right along in that group with the rest of the country. We are not equitably identifying our students. So it's very noticeable when you look at our total percentage of students of the different populations, and then look at the percent of students in those populations identified pathways. They should be the same, but they're not. So looking more at that, when we look at our evaluations, so traditional advanced learning testing, we're looking at what they already know. And that's biased because not all students have the same opportunities or experiences before they come to us. They're coming to us from very different areas. They're also coming to us with their own cultural identities. And there's a lot of differences, and tests do not, the traditional tests do not allow for that.
So is that our standardized tests aren't allowing for that?
I would say yes. I would say that any of those, they're testing students on what they already know. So they're testing students on what they've had exposure to. So, probably the majority of us in here, if we have children, we probably took them to museums, we had experiences with them, we may have traveled with them, they've done different things, and that opposed to another student who may be new to our country. Even thinking about vocabulary, how many use the word spigot? That's in a test. you know, when you look at that SPI GOT, what is that? Even some of our students, there's even a, you know, a generational bias there because even some of our own children may not even know the word spigot. That may
So,
not
so do
be
you
something.
prefer bubbler, who prefers bubbler versus water fountain?
So it is, the tests just inherently are biased. They're biased to whoever has that experience and who has lived that. And if you haven't, you're more likely to have more wrong on those assessments. It also, most of those tests are going to require you students to communicate verbally or in writing. And if that's a barrier for them because they're newer to our country, or it's just not a way that they're going to communicate as well. Thinking of some of our twice exceptional students who may have other areas where they, have vulnerabilities, but they have strengths in other areas, we're not seeing them. We're not seeing those strengths because the vulnerabilities are preventing them from showing their strengths to us. In opposition to that would be an equitable assessment of students' abilities. We're looking at how they think. We're not looking at what they know. These tests are fair and equitable. They remove that prior experience dependence. They don't need to have that prior experience. They're culturally neutral questions. There's nothing based specifically on America. There's no spoken or written language used. Even the directions are not spoken, they're not written. There's no verbal expression required. They do not need to express anything in writing. It's all multiple choice and I'm gonna show it to you, so it'll be a little bit easier to understand. So this is where the general abilities, and hopefully this will work pretty well. Oh my, okay.
Right,
Oh.
Another, window.
right, because we're signed in as Rebecca.
Okay.
Do I have access to this, Janelle?
I should, now I can't figure out how to go to back,
Yeah.
Rebecca, can you
Let me
move me
drag it
back?
over.
Thank you.
Let me see if I can, this is something that has to be shared, so I mean, I can't just open this up in a browser window.
No, because the ones that they have on their public site have all these other things in it. The ones that I have here are ones that the authors gave to me specifically, so all the
Oh,
extras aren't in there.
No,
you-
I found it. I will know in just a moment.
Okay, see if it works for you. If not, we can just go to the public one. That'll-
It's that. Word book is fun sometimes, hang on, but there's no better alternative, so. Just, I can't click on the link directly in board book, but I can do this. I don't have access either.
You don't have access either.
Yeah.
Okay.
just open it up.
Yeah, just gonna go.
Let me get you the keyboard, you know.
That would be great.
Did he present that MSAM about 2 years ago?
He probably did. Yeah, he's
I was
presented.
in a discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, he is. He's been around for a long
Well, he's
time.
been so deeply entrenched with your basic achievement testing and, or, what was, and then. maybe it's-
And Mike Janelle is bringing this up. I mean, what we're looking at here is not doing less of what we're currently doing. So students who need additional challenge because of where their current achievement level is, we're not backing off of
Right.
supporting that. It's just, we believe there are students who might have strong problem-solving skills and critical thinking skills that should be developed, that right now our referral process and our current testing process doesn't shine a spotlight on. So the first thing we want to see, and we may find a lot of those students are already being served in our existing program. But based on the research, we know there's a chance we might find a fair number of students that need something. Now, they might not benefit from our current type of advanced learning programming, so we may need to look at supplementing. We won't know until we actually go through our first round of assessments.
I'm trying to find the one on their public site and see that. because I don't think this is the thinking versus feeling. I don't remember where they were on their public site. I thought it was right here, but it's not. I do apologize because it is a great video.
Well, what I would do, Janelle, try to, go to the three dots next to Rebecca's,
I guess.
little circle icon on the upper right.
Okay,
Go to a new incognito window. And, then go to Google and sign in as yourself.
I'm going.
Just type Google and in that bar up there, type www.google.com. You need,
Ah, did I do something wrong there? Google site, did I not type correctly?
you'll need,
I can't see that far away to bring my
Yeah,
glasses.
that's okay.
Yeah.
I'll do this. for you.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm like, I'm trying, but I can't see. I realized when I got in here, I was like.
okay, so now we'll do a sign in.
Okay,
Okay, no.
And why don't you type in, let's take, okay,
yeah. Is
You
that
got
what
this,
you
you
want
don't need to do this.
why don't you do this and then Janelle can do her password. We'll try
Oh,
to,
I'll let you do that.
yeah, we'll try to simplify this down.
It's 1 hour or 2.
2.
I need your own.
Yeah, at the Waunakee, yeah. Just because that's a long,
Yeah, I know. And I'm right here, Janelle, you saw how many mistakes I made.
Okay, thank you.
and now Janelle, if you could tackle your password.
Yes, I can do that.
Okay, so now if you go to your drive and pull up the presentation,
That'll work.
and there's a yearly
Oh,
report.
so it was right there.
It was right there.
Oh, that's not where it was, whatever. I'll
Well,
have
do
to
you know
go
where
back.
it is in your drive?
Yeah.
Alright. I'm too fired
There you go.
and this is 22.
Yep. So now just find that slide. And you should be where you need to be.
There's always multiple ways to do things. And Tim's always good at that.
There we go. All right,
Here we go.
now we got her.
This, I think, hit the play.
We discussed thinking versus knowing briefly, and it seems to be a very important focus of this test. So can you explain the difference between the two? And how do the Naglieri general ability tests measure thinking rather than knowing?
So this is a very, very important point. And it's important because it helps us understand what our goal is when we're trying to assess a person's level of intelligence. Because so often we confuse knowledge with intelligence. And in the tests that have been used for the last 100 years, it is very typical to find test questions that demand knowledge, which are used to decide how smart a person is. I think that is the major flaw of all the tests that we've used for 100 years that have no and quantitative content. Because, for example, a typical verbal test on an intelligence test is a vocabulary test. And so that kind of a test measures knowing. Whereas a nonverbal test, like I described earlier, white square, blue
This
square,
is actually
white
example
circle,
of
question mark. That doesn't demand knowledge. You don't need to label it, you don't need to describe it with any kind of words. Or said a different way, you could describe it in any language, but it's not that the language that's being assessed. It's your thinking, it's your understanding of the relationship.
Another thing to consider when we're talking about thinking versus knowing is that a lot of students, all students have knowledge. There's no question about that. It's the academic knowledge that we're trying to removed from this equation in order to figure out how kids think best. And if that's confounded by academic knowledge, we're not going to be able to measure how they're thinking. So what we're trying to do is figure out how students think as related to what they already know. So when we're looking at these tests, it's also important to remember that we're looking to identify potential high ability. So if the child does not have that academic knowledge yet, this might not be the best test to use if you're going to look for a highly and profound, the self-contained program for highly profoundly gifted children who are radically accelerated. This is just a way for us to figure out these kids that we have been historically missing, who've been marginalized in our gifted programs, by recognizing how they think, measuring how they think, accepting them for who they are, and then working on expanding that building upon that, their knowledge.
So I like that because it is showing the actual.
So you just close this whole window.
What's that?
We can just close the whole incognito
Yeah,
window.
well, I was gonna say don't, because there's one more video. that-
Oh. I think let's just.
We'll
let's
just
yeah.
focus on this.
Yeah.
So, with this, there are 3 tests with the Naglieri general ability tests. They are all nonverbal, or there's a nonverbal, a verbal, and a quantitative. Each of the tests only takes 30 minutes. They're all on the computer. Students can take them on their iPad. There's no verbal instructions given at all. So the other video that I had in here, it does show where, how the directions are shown. It will give the example, it'll put it up, it'll show like a little bubble coming out of the child's head and saying what they're thinking. Oh, okay, it goes like this, and then they show how they select it. They show how a student chooses the wrong answer and how they switch it to they choose it and they, oh, that's not right, and how they change it. And so everything's done visually, no words, no written, no verbal. So the teachers don't have to say anything or provide any directions to them. They can follow it no matter what English or no matter what language they speak. And it's very well done in that regard. On the video, you saw the 3 were the authors of them, each of the tests, each one of them did one of them. So we've done a lot of work on investigating this whole assessment set, from meeting via Zoom with the authors to meeting with 2 different school districts who are implementing them. We've done a lot of, they have a full book out about the tests. We did a book study on that. We've done a lot of things to look at these tests, whether they're the right fit, how we might implement them, and so forth. So what we came up with, what we've come up with so far rather is this implementation plan. So starting in this next school year, we're going to be using these tests as a universal screener with our 2nd grade students. And we're looking at doing this at the beginning of the 2nd semester. We will be doing a very brief introduction to the whole staff at the beginning of the school year, just so they're aware. And then we will have additional times where we're meeting just with the 2nd grade staff, as well as our English learners and special education teachers for a more in-depth session to let them know a little bit more about the test and how it would work. And the purpose of the sessions is really just to help them understand, what is happening, not what we're doing with the results, just the implementation of it. And we really don't have any firmly laid plans for what we're going to do. We need to see the data and see what it's showing us and how we would like to move forward. We're hoping that we'll have some programming that would come about from that testing by the time we get to the 25-26 school year. But we need to see the data before we can look ahead to what we want to do with this. When in speaking with the other districts, one is an incredibly large district in Texas. And they were their administrator for elementary gifted and talented was spent hours and hours with us explaining everything, and he wants to set up a relationship where we can continue to talk back and forth as we start to implement this, to learn more about how we're using it. And he was great. We were able to learn a lot from him. They do their tests. They only do one of the tests on 3 different days, so they take 3 times to do it. The other district did 2 on one and 1 on another one. So there's a lot of different ways. We haven't even fully decided if we're doing 1 on each day or 2 in 1. But we're, working through that to determine, and we'll probably come to more of a consensus with that when we speak with the teachers directly to see how they're feeling about it.
So what about the students who are above 2nd grade? Intermediate, middle, high school, who may not have been identified for similar reasons? Is that a distant plan? Is there a way you're kind of looking at, if not this, something else, or?
Right, yeah, no, all good questions, all questions that we're still grappling with. We're not going to stop our referrals. The referrals can still come in. Parents, just the way we always have. This is obviously, even as Dina was explaining, this is not a good identifier for a self-contained, gifted, dramatically accelerated, nor is this a replacement for our accelerated math placements. Those have to do a different track. And in fact, when we spoke to the district's rep in Texas, they have that as well. They still have acceleration. It was interesting to hear that their advanced learning or talented and gifted program does not do the testing for that. That's a different department that does that.
Yeah.
They focus on this only. So it was interesting to hear all the different ways that other districts are using it. I've been working with MHS, which is the vendor for the test, to try to find anybody in this area so that we could go visit, even if they're a district that is, at the same stage that we are, and just exploring, just to go visit and see what they're doing. She's trying to find some for us to go to. These are very new tests. They finished them during the pandemic, so they're brand new, and they have national norms. When you were talking about how long it takes to get all of the results from the other standardized tests, these come back to you right away. They're all ready there for you. They give you your national norms. They will create our local norms. So all the norms come back to us right away. We have the data immediately to start working with. So once we administer this first time in this school year, we'll have that data to work on for the rest of the school year to start looking and thinking ahead to how we might want to use that.
Is there a cost associated with this?
There is, and Tim was working on the quote with them.
Yeah, I don't have our final numbers yet, but it's to assess students on an assessment like this for a single grade is a medium 4-figure cost. It's not particularly expensive.
I think wasn't it like $12 per student or something?
Yeah, it's small. It's not particularly expensive.
And then the other, because if we approve both of these in this
Yeah.
test schedule motion, but the other test is the gates. And that is something that we'll use for the older children.
Yes.
To
Or
the
reading,
older students.
or
Gates
advanced.
reading tests.
That's for
Yeah.
advanced,
Yeah.
8 and 9.
Yeah, and we use that at all grade levels, the Gates Beginning
Yeah.
test. We use it at all levels, and that's paper, pencil, and we do the scoring ourselves on that. We don't, that's not sent in for scoring, so there isn't just the purchase of the materials, which the majority of the materials for the Gates McGinnity, they're reusable. So that's not a huge purchase.
Yeah, I think, the big takeaway from this is we're just trying to make sure we're not missing students who we could be serving better and be more inclusive. I think the larger question is with this first administration, until we try this approach, we won't know how large that population is. Because again, to reiterate, we're not planning to pivot away from anything that we're currently doing. We just want to make sure we don't have students who are underserving that we're missing. And we don't know how large that population is. And so I think if we were to find a significant population, then we're going to have to look at how would you serve them. And there have been many programs over the years that have provided ways, and Janelle and her colleagues in Pathways have done a marvelous job of reaching out to districts that are already working with these types of programming. These are often going to be elements that we don't do a lot of right now. So when you see those recommendations in future budget requests for expanding pathway staffing, it's partly just due to growing enrollment, which, you know, our pathway staffing has been set where it's been for 2 decades now. But also, we're really limited in our ability, if we find the need for opening up an additional lane of programming, our ability to resource that with current staffing is very limited. And, you know, to your point, Mark, you know, you asked, you know, what about upper grades? I mean, Janelle and I, along with a few others at the high school, have had some very, very early conversations about ways to support students with strong areas of interest in a specialty, kind of do something beyond an unstructured independent study project. But again, if we were to do that, that requires somebody help coordinate that with them. So
On to that point, have we been given universal intelligence tests to our either first or second graders?
Not generally, no,
Okay.
unless they're referred to us for a general intellectual, which most of those would result in a full grade level acceleration.
and you saw we have some of those, but
Mhm.
not many.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
And so just as we're saying is like, how does this change what we're doing? It's just, the overall idea is to look more at a talent development model. So those students coming to us with what they have, what they know, and then looking at those students who are finding that innate ability, but they haven't been exposed to things. So it's providing that exposure. It's a more equitable identification because we're providing those experiences to all of our students. And again, we'll continue to use our best practices for acceleration that we're already using, and continue to accept referrals, and the universal screener would just be in addition to the referrals. And it should, in essence, reduce the number of referrals received as students would be identified before
Sure.
they would be referring. Most of our referrals aren't happening in K1. We will get a few for K or K1, but they're minimal. We get a lot starting at second grade level, so this should help with that. And yeah, there's another little blurb there. Somehow I need to get that so it's shareable, so we don't have to go through all the steps, but yeah, so, and then if you needed any further information, our information is on that curriculum and instruction page.
You can click through to that, Janelle, just so, and also so people watching this at home can see what that page would look like. You want to do the confirm. So this is the CNI website.
Okay, we're playing
I'll let
Christmas
you know.
Day. And then down here, it says about pathways. I can move that, there we go. And then you'll see here, it talks about the different general, like intellectual and the specific subject areas and so forth, the visual and performing arts, leadership, creativity. This information is here, and then it talks about identification, programming, and then summer opportunities, which we update each year. But this has not been changed in our identification. It's still just going to tell you about the referrals. We haven't added anything about this universal screening because they haven't begun. But that's something that we'll need to update. We do have links here to the different referral forms. We've been working, and thanks to Lola, she's been wonderful in helping me to create fillable PDFs, but now we're changing again, I think. So we're looking at different ways. We've done Google Docs, we've done all sorts of different ways. So now we have them as fillable PDFs, and now we're working through some of the intricacies with that, but making things more accessible so students can get to this. It would be nice if they could get to this a little bit more easily. They're struggling. We've had struggles with parents not being able to find this on the website, but we're trying to just send them links when we get inquiries rather than going through all the steps with them. But are there any questions about?
Have you, so for the identification, we're making improvements, which is awesome. It's great. Are there any areas in our Pathways program that you see this year, like in terms of our programming, what we're currently doing with our students that we've adjusted or that we need to adjust, like, you know, if we're working with a group on in the intermediate school, are there any new programs that we're doing from a pathways perspective? Different than in the year past, or is there new things that we're looking at?
Usually
That we
we
need
need
to plan for.
like different opportunities that we're providing. for
Yeah.
them. Okay, so I didn't include all the opportunities this year. I did that last year,
Yeah.
but the increases this year, the changes, I would say, we're looking at 5.8, we added an additional writing opportunity that we're working with students on. That has been the area in 5.8 in particular that we get a lot of inquiries about because it seems like our ELA focus is really on the reading and not as much on the writing. And so while students may be identified through a reading process, their true passion or strength areas in writing. So we've added a couple more, and I think it's the playwright that we added. And so we've had a couple of students that have done really well with that. I believe last year, the play that our student wrote was chosen and was read. So we've done that now for a couple of different years. Both of them are staying the same because we're tapped, we're stretched about as far as we can. Over the years, the only, we added that in because it was fairly easy to add in. Our problem is there are a lot of different things I would like to do. There's just no time. There's no time to add anymore, and we can't do anymore. Especially when we're adding things like doing the auto triggers and looking at all the data that adds another layer onto things that we're having to spend our time on. And trying with that process. And then when you look at some of the things that we're already doing, our students are very successful. So our FPS team, so with our two of our sixth grade teams and a high school team attending.
You're just back from Indiana.
Just back from Indiana. So it was fabulous. It was wonderful. So thank you for the approval on all of that because the sixth graders were super excited. The high schoolers, of course, always love it. But it is it's a really cool experience to be able to watch them interact with students from all over, students from Singapore, students from all these different areas and hearing about it. The sixth graders in particular this year got very excited. There's a component of FPS called CMPS or community problem solving. So the FPS that we participate in is GIPS or it's like a general informational problem solving. The community problem solving is a huge endeavor where the students actually work a lot, very hard for a very long time with a coach, and they are looking at their own community and looking at a problem to address within the community. And there are a vast range of projects that these students have done. The sixth graders were so impressed when we went they have a CMPS fair. So all of the teams that do that each year do a big they have presentations and you go from table to table and see all the things that they've done. So the sixth graders this year are very excited and they want to do community problem solving as they are getting older. So it'll be interesting to see if they follow through with it. It's a huge endeavor. It's a lot of meeting with officials. You're meeting probably with the village board, you're meeting, it's a lot of investigation that goes into it to determine what are the problems in their community that they want to address. And so it was really exciting to see those sixth graders get very excited about that. And just the way that they interacted with everyone. We were on the floor with one of the teams from Australia. So there was a lot of conversations in the hallway about different things in Australia and how they're different from America. And so it's a great experience overall for them to be able to experience.
And I just ask, because I know we're doing awesome things with our Pathways program. We have a large percentage of our students that are identified as Pathway students. What is it, 230 students in the high school? It's a large percentage.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking of our 3-year plan and your budgeting plan. And it sounds like there's more, and we're gonna be identifying more. So I'm just thinking from a planning perspective, make sure we've got that somehow planned in as a priority for the school board to maybe invest more.
You will see it's always in those budget requests.
Yes.
And I mean, I do acknowledge the challenges you as our board face.
Yes.
Because, we have a very supportive community. We have a lot of really positive things going on the financial management side in our district.
Yes.
Yet we know that, you face some very hard decisions, but those pathways requests for staffing have been in for several years. And, if we were to increase the staffing, there would be a lot of benefits to students. More personalization and probably better programming for students that are already receiving some type of additional challenge. And as we engage in this idea of, are there students we can serve that we are not currently serving, but would benefit from additional challenge? We're gonna have to have some additional resources to make that happen. So, I don't want to make this about, a cap in hand session. I don't like these updates to be that, but I just do want to acknowledge your really good point, Katie.
Anything else?
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Do you
Janelle.
want these over back over here?
Yeah, I will take those back. Very, very much.
Thank you. Few days.
This brings us to, circling back to the AI, presentation we had last month. An opportunity for any questions or discussions as we've, perhaps reflected on what we learned. Or were introduced to.
Right, as I know that was a very packed meeting last month, and we covered a lot of information, and it really crowded out discussion. And that probably wasn't a bad thing, because I suspect there's a lot of benefit to having some time to process through it. So, I'm very interested to kind of hear your thoughts, in particular, aside from your general thoughts on the topic. How do you want information on this to come back to you as our curriculum committee? And then what do you feel is the right way to bring information into the board as a whole? And I guess my only suggestion on that is you probably don't want to do that during regular session. You probably want it either in a special meeting or in a board development session, because just to introduce the landscape is going to take a little bit of time.
Well, and there's a policy component, I think, that we need to probably establish, and then there's also, sounds like there perhaps maybe an ask for funds to help support a AI program that the staff can use. Am I understanding that correctly? There was can't remember the name of it, but there's
So we spent some money. The money we've spent hasn't been, it's been something we've been able to do in budget. It's been below board approval levels. I think where it might come in down the road, and I don't want to get ahead of things. This is a dynamic area. I think the bigger questions so right now we have a product called BRIS.
Yeah.
We've subscribed to for teachers at the intermediate, middle, and high schools, because when we piloted it, that was where the greatest utilization was. And also, realistically looking at what BRIS provides, those were the schools where it provided the most support for teachers. I think the larger question will come, and it might not come this year, because from a policy perspective, we need to make sure we're in good ground. And we don't want, I feel in education, there are probably lessons to be learned both from the internet emergence in the 90s, where I would say, even though, and I would, going in the Wayback Machine, I would say our district was pretty forward leaning on technology in the 90s and did a lot of good things, and was probably more, and Joan and Mark, you were here in the classroom at that time. I would say we were more in the realm of early adopters at that time, but a lot of districts weren't. And a lot of districts, when they did that, did not really think about student gaps and access to technology. Now, we addressed that with our one-to-one program quite some time ago. So I think there's lessons about not being overly conservative when something's coming in that can really make a difference, and also making sure you're patching up gaps in access for kids. That's, I think, the lesson from the 90s. I think the lesson in the more recent past, though, is mobile devices and social media, I think, and I would include us in that group, but I think nationally, we tended to be too permissive. That, there's like, well, we should have gone more aggressively in the nineties for the internet. Let's not miss the boat with internet 2.0 and mobile devices. I think caution would have been better serving our kids with social media and mobile devices when they came in. So I think we need to learn from both technology shifts that we've already seen. And for this technology shift, try to, find the Goldilocks lane, and make sure we are supporting all kids, make sure we're not leaving great opportunities for kids and teachers on the shelf when we could be realizing the benefits, because this is rapidly going to be impacting the world our kids are moving into post-graduation. At the same time, if we were to bring this in for kids at developmentally too early an age and make them dependent and inhibit the growth of their critical thinking and problem solving, that would be extremely harmful. So I think that's the big conceptual question. Policy comes along with that. And then as you think about closing gaps, there may be an investment component to that too, but it's a big question.
So, yeah, so I was thinking policy, just looking at policy for staff and policy for students, what that looks like and how that we, because we're also like moving away from having phones in the classrooms and
Yes.
all those things, like we're kind of pivoting there. So all that probably needs to be taken into consideration. And then I'm thinking from a board discussion, it sounded like there's a lot of efficiencies that take place with AI. So how does that look as we're budgeting or, all those things?
Yes.
I think there's, and what does that look like and so I think there's the policies, the efficiencies that we can identify. That's just, those were my thoughts as we came out of that meeting and that discussion of what we need to discuss further in terms of AI.
So in some ways, what's the plan going forward? Isn't that kind of what you're asking? And maybe that's what the board needs to hear is from our leaders. What's the rollout plan for making this work in an effective way? What's the timeline? When does it need to go to policy? Is that kind of what would be helpful?
Yeah, and I think, and I can follow up later for you on this. Quite frankly, most districts do not have developed plans on this. And districts are all over the place in terms of how they're beginning to have a structured approach. Informally, it's happening every place, but formally, people are in very different places. Now, our colleagues over in Waunakee do have what I would call a pretty good plan. Or at least I will say it's I think they're happy with their plan. I look at their plan and I say there's some great stuff in Waunakee's approach. But I think what will jump out at you when I share with you later on, you'll see from a strategic planning approach, it's just from the standpoint of developing a coherent approach, it's well done. Regardless of what you think about their goals and their methods, the planning approach is really good. So I'll send you a link to that. But I do think the other thing I think we need to do is think about stakeholder engagement. When we discuss it here, the community's seeing it some, but I do think we need to think about getting this more on the minds of parents, both in terms of understanding what we're doing, and then also thinking about kind of the future for their children. And I think, at least I think I heard, so where the curriculum fit. Your focus is on what's really our main thing as the district, which is creating learning experiences that prepare our students for success in life after they graduate. We're also an employer that has many different functions that we always want to have operating more efficiently. So this committee's focus really is on the instructional side. I think for all organizations today, there has to be some consideration. I think that was embedded in there, Katie. How does AI help us do all of our other work more effectively too? And that's not strictly a curriculum committee piece. We probably need to bring Stephen Alley into that conversation, certainly Rick Franz from a technology perspective. So, I mean, I do think that's something as a board, you're going to want to begin to sort through, and certainly, I'm sure Dr. Brown has perspectives on this, and I'm excited to learn more about this. But on the instructional side, I'm guessing you'd probably like to have us connect back in at some point here, right?
With the plan, with what the plan is, or, I mean, we don't have to create the plan, but
No,
we know there's a plan and there's gonna be stakeholder engagement. I think it's probably good to have a plan first before we.
Let me see if it's very simple, I will just show you what I was referring to. I'll find the link and send it to you. It's not super easy to Google and bring up, and I think, a big question is, having received the information you've received, you have a basis as the three members of the curriculum committee that maybe your four other colleagues do not have right now. What do you think is appropriate for us to look at for kind of a full board introduction to this?
Tim, is it too big a topic to tackle at one of our special board curriculum nights during those presentations?
I think it probably, so,
Could we take like a double slot or something?
yeah, so that could be an option, because we always have a tentative schedule, but we could easily take two departments that we're going to present this year, roll them into 25, 26, and that would free up an hour slot. We could definitely do that.
I think more than an hour, it's too much.
It is, it's like overload, when I reflect back on that day, it's like,
It's
I realized how much I don't know.
it's
and
a
you
tsunami
asked
of
me now,
information.
I don't know what I don't know, and
Right.
I can't even.
Then you
hardly-
don't know what to ask.
I know, I can hardly formulate. It was great to see how it can streamline some of the teachers' work. But you also don't want to streamline it to the point where it becomes impersonal.
Yes.
It's like it's such a double-edged sword in almost every part that you put it in. And it's such a massive body of knowledge that I don't know where to put it yet.
I mean, I think that could be a good way to go, would be to just focus on clearing some space in one of those special meetings.
If that's possible, I think we already have that time dedicated and set aside. I feel we're gonna need we may need a special meeting for this referendum. It just seems like our time gets.
Yes.
And maybe if the information is more honed in on specifically what we're doing and what we're planning on doing. And how that will look specific to Waunakee. I mean, there's a million things AI that we could do, but what are our plans for how it'll look for us, and what are the parameters that we're utilizing for students and for our teachers? I mean, that's just to kind of hone it in specifically. Or what we want.
And I would say, if your schedules allow, we need to do something structured. If you're looking to get a little more exposures before we bring something more structured in, we do have some, if you're wondering what teachers are getting, we do have some AI topics at Learning Fest this year. So put in a plug for Learning Fest.
And just be sure that we get those scheduled.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
sometimes we're not in the loop
Yeah.
always on
Maybe the day before or something.
And then it's a little late to
it's
adjust.
kind of hard to, if we could get the schedules on some of those opportunities.
I think we can work on that. So, Okay. I will work with Amy on, our schedule for the presentations and see if we do have one. I want to really see if we have library media up in this coming year, because it'd be very easy to kind of piggyback on their slot, shift their parallel department into the next year, and then we would have a nice hour lane. I'm not 100% sure we're able to do that, but we can take a look at that.
Future agendas and meetings. Um,
Well, so one thing I heard, and I do think when I asked Randy, that'll feed into a conversation with Dr. Brown on your closed session for achievement data. Are you looking at that being part of the full board meeting? Are you looking at, can a committee do a closed session?
I think it should be committee first.
Okay.
And then, because I think there may be a lot more information and we can kind of sift it down to what goes to the full board.
But it
in
also
the same
depends on what's
breath, but to
allowed.
me, it's, if the information is in the domain and our administrative staff or building leaders have this information, it seems remiss that the board would not have it, the board as a whole. And so the first concern is it possible to do this with the committee itself? And then the second thing, would that carry over to a board meeting possibly in closed session as well, so that the entire board has a sense before October how, where we're at.
And it could just be, this is the forward exam from. Last year, this it doesn't have to, the details behind it.
No, no.
just comparison.
No 60-slide presentations.
Or, the ACT, average ACT
Yes.
from last year versus this year, the pre-ACT.
And
this
if
simple.
it is really simple like that, could we just do it at our retreat? Because we're gonna be talking about our priorities, and it would be so nice to know if we've made anything in. as we
I
set
mean,
things.
from a functional perspective, I couldn't agree more. I believe you notice your retreat as an open meeting though.
Mhm.
What I mean, and again, I mean, if we find out we can do this.
Yeah.
Then I think what we do in terms of scheduling this year and what we do in terms of scheduling next year might look a little different.
Sure.
What I would propose is not meeting in July.
Yep.
I know my schedule is pretty occupied in July, but perhaps tentatively scheduling, if we can, a meeting in August, and if we can do it predominantly closed for this purpose, which again, I have no idea. I've got to check with Randy, and Randy may say we need to check with WASB. We'll find out. But we could do that with this committee in August. And then do something with the full board. Because certainly if we find we can do it in closed session with a committee, then we most certainly can do it in closed session with the full board.
And I'm thinking if we can't do closed session with committee, but we can do closed session with the full board,
Right.
let's do it, let's do
Right,
it.
right.
Yeah.
So I think shooting for something in August, one way or the other, I think would be the way to go. So I don't know if your calendars, we could maybe put a placeholder committee meeting in.
Yeah, sure. The other thing I think Amy was considering sharing rollout plan for math and, but I mean, we had a brief conversation, but we should get that.
Well, and I think, we would, at some point here in the summer,
We need
you,
to get
Amy and I,
together, kind
do
of
is pretty
rough out
sure
a
we'll have
calendar
kind of
and-
that long-term planning conversation for
yep,
the year.
yep.
So we'll schedule that separately, but looking at an August meeting for this. So in the summer, do you like morning meetings?
I'm
Yeah,
I prefer late morning. We're gonna do it
Okay.
late or early afternoon.
So,
Early morning is not,
that's hard because, well,
sorry.
camp grandparents all,
Yeah,
all
okay.
this, but
So
we
Tuesdays
can
and
work it out.
Thursdays
I can
at
work it
7,
out.
Tuesday and
I can
Thursday
work
at
it out.
7:30 would work best for me. If we're gonna do it.
What are you looking at?
So like August 6th at 7:30?
yeah, so August 6th, there's actually a full day AI summit over in
In
Waunakee that
Pewaukee.
I will be at.
That's right.
But
13th?
the 13th, that's Learning Fest.
Oh,
But, so you will not, if you do it on the 13th, you will not have Amy. So I would recommend not scheduling.
Yeah, we're going to anyways, so.
You said Thursday, Katie, what about the 8th?
I can't do the 8th.
How about the 15th?
Yes. That works for me.
And if you want to do a 10 o'clock, is that better for you?
No, 7:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays work.
Okay.
I think that would be fine.
Yep.
Okay. And I think let's plan on keeping to it because I would say by the 15th, even if we find out it doesn't operate for us to have a closed session to review assessment data, I think at a minimum, we could talk about our it might be a briefer meeting. And we've had some long meetings,
We could
but we could talk about the
calendar.
roadmap for the
Yeah.
year.
And so if there are some topics that are important to you to be considering for finding a place to slot them, like we did last year. It'd be great to get your ideas and that'd be a good time to start roughing.
Yeah,
that out.
and we certainly will have items as well. I mean,
Yes.
we are due to bring in, we're gonna have a team convening when we get back. It's going to be looking at updating our academic and career planning framework. Actually, at the top of the hour, Michelle McGlynn, Brian Borowski and I are meeting on personal financial literacy, which is now a graduation requirement for the students entering 9th grade in the fall. And so we've got time, but we are going to need to bring in our recommendations on how we satisfy that with all of our students, because only about 60% of our kids take dollars and cents today. We'll have several other topics that will need to come in to the committee next year, so plus our regular business.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you.